The 2020 season was a very unusual one, and early on we realised we weren't going to be able to mount the exhibition that we had planned. So we decided instead to look at our permanent collection and to develop an exhibition from things that we owned and had easy access to. So we've moved today down into the Glebe House, and that's where all of the artworks that we've looked at in this series would normally reside. And if you visited here in the past, or if you come in the future, that's where you'll see those pictures that we've looked at. And because there's so much in the house, so much going on, so much energy from all the different objects, you don't get time to spend with individual artworks. You have to move through at a certain pace. And the exhibition was a wonderful opportunity for us to allow people to have time with things that they wanted to look at. So far, all the art we've looked at has been modern art. It's part of that modernist tradition. It's all 20th century art. A part that is from the Hokusai. But today we're going to look at contemporary art. And that's why I'm down here in the kitchen. Every year in the autumn, we invite a contemporary artist to do something in the Glebe House. And it can be very interesting for the artists and very rewarding for visitors to the house. It's interesting to the artists because they normally work in galleries like the Glebe Gallery, white spaces, and the artwork that we've looked at has all been in white spaces so far. And it's interesting for visitors because that sort of contemporary public art is designed for white spaces, whereas the art that we've been looking at so far was domestic. It was meant for people to buy and bring into their homes. So they're two very, very different things. And for me, one of the most interesting of those interventions was last year, and it was a Derry artist called Locky Morris. And he had a number of pieces in the house, but the one that really worked for me was the piece that we had just beside me here. So before we get ahead of ourselves, let's just stop here and take a breath and look at the piece. Again, working from top to bottom and from left to right, just look at the colours, the shapes, the patterns, the textures. Look at how they relate to each other and just very slowly get to know the piece. It's a much bigger work than we've looked at before. It's 165 centimetres by 130. So really take your time and look into all the corners. There's quite a lot of depth in this picture. There's the foreground and the middle ground, but then it goes much deeper in the reflection. So think about that, think about the depth in it, think about the perspective. And although it's a photograph, think about it like a drawing or a painting and how you would create this if you were trying to reproduce it. And once you're happy that you've looked at it enough, let's start to take it apart and figure out what we're looking at. It can take a little while to figure out what it is you're looking at, but once you do recognize it, it becomes a lot easier. If you haven't spotted it yet though, just look at the things that you can recognize. Look at the notices and the signage, read what they say, and try and figure out what sort of a place this is and what might be going on there. Because this artwork was installed in the Glebe House and was viewed by visitors as part of a guided tour, it doesn't have a label. Nothing in the house has labels, and I don't think a label would have helped visitors with this. I think it has enough impact that it doesn't need to be explained. You don't need the help. Before we move on to look at the title of this work and the materials and to try and understand it and connect with it, let's just have a think about what contemporary art is and how it fits along with modernism. And so far, the work that we've looked at has almost all been modernism or fitted within that tradition. And we won't overcomplicate it here. Modernism is a sort of a hold-all term for most 20th century art. So the sort of things you think about like surrealism or cubism or abstract expressionism, all those sort of art forms grouped together as modernism. And the sort of characteristics that modernist art has is that it was made by an individual and it celebrates the individual. the artist and the artist's identity and what the artist was looking at. So if you go to see a Picasso exhibition, you're looking at Picasso every bit as much as you're looking at his painting and sculptures. Whereas if you go to see the Sistine Chapel, you kind of understand that that was commissioned. So you're looking at what Michelangelo was asked to do by someone else, by the commissioning body, in that case, the Catholic Church. In modernism, you're also looking at experimentation. The artists were trying to do something that hadn't been done before. And every facet of modernism was contemporary in its own time. Modernism does have its origins a little bit further back than the start of the 20th century, when we would kind of say that's when it began. It has its origins in French Impressionism and Post-Impressionism. And you might remember I said that Hokusai was a big influence on those artists. So that's kind of where he fits into our story of looking at art, at modern art. But what we're looking at here is contemporary art, and contemporary art is roughly defined as new art that was made in the last decade. So like the predecessors, they're trying to do something that hasn't been done before, but they're also trying to speak to the viewer, because visitors to their exhibitions will be alive in the same world and have the same experiences that they have and should be able to relate to it. So if you think back to artists like Victor Passmore and John Bratby, who were rallying against life after the Second World War, these artists today are looking at our life, our experience. And you can see that really clearly at the moment, because we've had such a strange year, and you're starting to see it in art and music and literature, references to coronavirus and to pandemics and to that sort of lockdown mentality. This artist is called Locky Morris, and if you're from Donegal, you will know his work. He made the pole star sculpture on the roundabout outside Letterkenny, and everybody's passed it. And I think it's really important and such a wonderful thing to be exposed to that quality of art regularly. It seeps in and it just makes your life better. I really do think art's that important. And I've chosen these last three artists, Locky Morris, James Dixon and Nora McGuinness, because they have such a strong association with Ulster and with Donegal. And I hope that we can recognise that we have within us the ability to make this amazing art, and that it's not something that has to happen in London or Paris or New York. So with all that in mind, let's look back at Locky's artwork, and here's what the label would have looked like if there was one. Let's look past the title in this case, because that's very important, and let's look at the materials first of all. It's an LED light box and a Duratran. Now, I didn't know what a Duratran was before this exhibition, but it's the kind of print. It's a photographic print. It's a transparent photographic print that you use for light boxes. So this is a light box, and it's lit up from behind. You can see the cable coming down below it and plugging into the wall on the right hand side. Locky Morris kind of likes that you can see how things work. He likes the cables and plugs to show in a lot of cases. And you can also see, as I said before, it's a big work. It's 165 by 130 by 10, so it's 10 deep. And I think that 10 centimeter depth is important because it adds to the presence of the work. It feels like a really substantial thing. Photographs can often feel quite sort of flimsy against a wall, but this doesn't have that. This has real power and presence. The title translates as the disappearing head. In this case, Locky was sitting in a hospital waiting, and he noticed that the lift door had a sort of a crease in it, and that his reflection had no head. The head had disappeared in the reflection. So he took his phone out and photographed it, and the hand didn't appear in the photograph either. So we've all had that experience of being in hospital, waiting for news, waiting for a doctor or a nurse, waiting to have a test, waiting for visiting hours to begin, just waiting for the lift door to open. And it has only just struck me now, as I'm talking about this, that that whole experience is heightened because of coronavirus. But this work was made in 2019, so it has absolutely nothing to do with coronavirus. And it would be a mistake to read that into the work. Having said that, there's no reason why we can't connect with this work on that level. There's no reason why the work can't take on a new level of meaning for us, because that's what great art does, is that it connects with people over time and over experiences and over distances. I had to ask a friend to translate this for me. My French is so bad that I wasn't even sure it was French. And she translated it as the disappearing head, which is what I had thought Locky had told me it meant. She went a bit further though. She said it could also mean the head gets out of the way and the soul takes over and you act on instinct. And I think that's really interesting and helpful if you look back at the work. Locky was sitting in a hospital waiting for something, but because he's an artist and because he's such a thoughtful artist, he spotted something in front of him and he took his phone out and he photographed it. And it would be easy to dismiss that as effortless because he used something that's available to all of us all the time, our phone camera. But the devil's in the detail. Locky spends his whole life looking for these things. It might seem like happenstance, but it really isn't. He's constantly aware of what's around him, and when he does spot something that might be meaningful, he's able to capture it and make something of it. So when you look back at the fact that it's a huge LED light box with a Duratran transparency in it, it was taken using a camera phone, but it was taken by him. You're looking at the world through his eyes. And the wonderful irony in this artwork is that his eyes don't look back. So I hope you've enjoyed these videos about looking at art, and I hope you found them helpful. It's been a long journey. We started in 1832 and we've come right up to 2019. And those 4 very simple steps of looking at and describing and understanding and connecting with, they're all that you need to begin your journey of looking at art. And that journey can last your whole life if you wanted to. And I strongly encourage you to always go into galleries and museums. If you're passing and you have a little bit of time, that's the place to spend it.